Welcome to the Stokecast, where each week we bring you an inspiring athlete, adventurer, or entrepreneur and dig into their stories and strategies for balancing work, life, and adventure while having fun and making a difference. I'm Jonathan Ronzio.
And I'm Emily Holland. Thanks for joining us today.
Let's get to it. Today's conversation is a little heavy. Yeah. It's very fun.
Yeah.
And we have a great time chatting with our guest, who is actually Stacy Bare.
Incredible guy.
He's a veteran. You might have seen the movie Adventure Not War, which is his story of revisiting the places that he served in when he went back to reframe his experience as a positive one, to ski and to climb instead of fight. And that movie is incredible, so watch it if you haven't seen it. But he's also director of programming and operations at the Phoenix, advocating for a sober lifestyle. And he does so many different things. But at the heart of it all, Stacy is just a incredible storyteller. Really paints a passionate picture, and through this episode takes us on a journey of awe and discovering moments that wake us up to really live.
Yeah. Wow. You just did a great job there, Jonathan. No, but I think he's just so thoughtful and intentional in the way that he lives, but also the way that he responds to some of our questions. And he's very forthcoming with how he feels. And I really appreciated his candor. And I hope you guys enjoy this week's episode of the Stokecast with Stacy Bare.
We'll get right to it. Enjoy.
All right, so we have Stacy Bare here, skier, climber, just adventurer, awesome guy. We're excited to chat with you today, Stacy.
Thanks, I'm excited to be here. I sign all my emails with stoked anyway, for the most part. So
I think I remember that.
Yeah, I feel like this is when you guys reached out to me, I was like, man, can I say stoked to Stokecast?
Hell yeah,
there's also the same, if you know Steve Larassier, who runs Stoked Mentoring, I've always felt awkward emailing back and forth with him as well with stoked.
No, that's great.
Don't feel awkward here. We use it all the time.
All the time. Yeah. Right on brand. It was a conversation written in the stars meant to happen, right?
That's right. There you go.
Well, thanks for joining us. We're excited to dig into your story, man. There's so much to cover. So let's throw it back to January. Emily and I were at OR show. We saw you on stage there for the Backcountry Night of Stoke.
Can we paint this a little bit though? We saw you on stage, I think in hot pink leggings, was it? I think They're
actually giraffe tights. I don't think I wore that. I do have a bright pink neon kind of digi camo pair of tights, but I don't wear those as much as the giraffe tights.
Oh, giraffe, that's what it was.
I feel like I was wearing the giraffe tights. Yeah, because I think a lot of times we have a tendency to take ourselves a little too seriously, even when we're talking about really important stuff in the outdoors. And I like to mess with that whenever I can.
Yeah, it was certainly a contrasting dynamic that was interesting and awesome.
Yeah.
With what you were talking about with the subject matter of your film, which was amazing. So your film being Adventure Not War, and so for anybody listening, do you want to kind of give a brief history of that project and of you, just a general story?
Sure. So Adventure Not War is the title of a much larger project, actually, which is my goal to go back and ski or climb in all the places where I've been to war or cleaned up after war. So my background, at some point, part of my background includes military engagement in Bosnia and Iraq, with a couple deployments that were supposed to happen to Afghanistan but never did. And then also, as a civilian, I did explosive ordnance disposal work in Angola, which is in Southwest Africa. So if you know where South Africa is on a map, just northwest of South Africa is Namibia, and just above Namibia is Angola. And then I also worked in landmine clearance in the former Soviet state of Georgia, in a little breakaway republic called Abkhazia, which is in the northwest corner of that country. So if you look at a map and you find Turkey, just to the east of Turkey is Georgia, and then all the way up the coast, right where Georgia has a border with the Russian Federation, is the Abkhaz Republic. And then I came back from Iraq in 2007, and that ended my military career, although the Army thought about calling me back one more time to go to Afghanistan, and those final orders never came through. Had a lot of issues with substance abuse, adjustment disorder, some of those challenges, some post-traumatic stress. And at some point got climbing. And then after a few years climbing, made the decision that I wanted to go back to the places that I had been to war and rewrite the narrative, my own narrative for those places. And it started out as a pretty selfish ambition, still is in many ways a pretty selfish ambition. And I think it's okay to have some selfish ambition, but I wanted to tell a broader story as well, and realized that the power of film and storytelling might help change some minds about what people thought of different conflict zones, if they thought of them at all, and especially with Iraq, since that's one of the two wars that are now the longest wars in our country's history. And it's funny because we made a bunch of shirts and merchandise as well, and so people can go on to combatflipflops.com and order their Ski Iraq t-shirts and mugs. But it's funny because people are like, oh, Ski Iraq, that's a funny t-shirt. And I'm like, oh, no, we actually did this, right? Like, you can go ski in Iraq. And they're like, really? And that's kind of what we want people to ask that question. We want people to think about what they could be doing around the world and engaging in maybe a different way than they have been engaging.
I love that on so many levels that you're just, again, it's wearing tights, talking politics, right? Like you're a man of inspiring contrast.
Well, thanks. I mean, I think that's kind of where we need to be at some level. It's just fun too, right? Like, wearing tights is funny. It's fun to look funny and just kind of enjoy life, right? I mean, there's all these things. There's a lot of horrible, horrible things that are happening in the world and that are happening every day, but there's also a lot of beautiful things that are happening every day. And I think we have a challenge to be able to live with that tension in our lives. And I think it's easy to go too far one way or the other, right? It's easy to get so focused on the stoke that maybe we run over all these beautiful things that maybe we're missing that could be really good, or if stoke becomes an escape to the point where we're unwilling to engage with the world around us, that's not necessarily good either. So, and there's a time and a place for that, right? Like, my daughter's 2 years old. I'm not going to overwhelm her with what's happening in our country right now, with what's happening in our borders, what's happening globally. I can't imagine what it's like to be a father in Syria right now, but I force myself to have that thought from time to time. But I'm also not going to deprive my daughter of the things that, through a variety of reasons, some positive, some negative, but beyond my control, I'm able to ensure that my daughter has, a hot bath and a bunch of bath toys and a bunch of stuffed animals, and I'm going to play with her with those things, and I'm not going to deprive her for the sake of teaching her what life is like as a refugee right now. But down the road, I'll certainly have those conversations with her. But it's that really difficult balance, I think, that we have. But that those of us who are in a material wealthy situation, I think absolutely we have a responsibility to think about those difficult, harder things to think about and figure out how we might be able to participate in a solution. And I think a lot of times in the outdoor industry, we get so focused on our own stoke, we forget that we're part of a much larger ecosystem.
Yeah, wow. So one of the things that you touched on that I want to kind of circle back to, which inherently in the Army or in any kind of marine life, Navy, whatever, you're put in situations that are hopefully outside of your comfort zone. Hopefully you don't deal with that all the time. And then after you left that, you also put yourself in another situation that could be potentially out of your comfort zone, which is removing landmines. Kind of an interesting career path choice. Love to hear about that. But then also, nice. And then eventually into climbing, into skiing and all those things. So another way that you're pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. So is that something that you took away from the Army that pushed you in the rest of your life? Or is that something that you found has been inherent within you since you were young?
As a kid, I was actually really shy, and I was really kind of frightened to engage with the world around me for a long time, and was pushed out of my comfort zone because I saw that's where you had the most fun, I think, when you push yourself. And but you also, there's a huge opportunity to get hurt, right? And so I think personally, I feel lucky that I've been in an environment with my friends and my family where it's okay for me to push. It's okay for me to go out of my comfort zone, because if I get hurt, I know that I have something to fall back onto, right? So I guess to use the metaphor for bouldering, I've always had a lot of crash pads and a lot of spotters around me. Mm-hmm. And even with that, you know, at different times I've fallen through the cracks, and I've had some significant traumas in my life, and I've created some significant traumas, you know, compounded those oftentimes as well, and made some really bad decisions in life that thankfully I've been able to move by and large past, or I'm moving through. And some of those decisions you kind of, it's a daily move through at this point, right? Like, you know, I don't know if you ever fully recover from some of the stuff, in the sense that like recovery is a daily journey. Like you have to keep putting, you know, one step in front of the other. But I don't know. I mean, I guess in a lot of ways I've always felt, and some of those things didn't even feel risky necessarily. They just felt like a natural next step. Like for a long, you know, like it was just like, oh, well, you know, I was in the Army, and then I was stationed in Sarajevo, and I saw that there was a landmine issue in Sarajevo, and the Army and I had different ideas about where my career was going to go, but I wanted to continue to be of service in a way that made sense to me, and that was landmine clearance, because I had been exposed to that firsthand, and thought that was a problem that I could help be a part of the solution. Climbing certainly was pushing myself out of my comfort zone. Getting sober, which I did about 7 years ago, was certainly pushing myself out of my comfort zone, and still pushes myself out of my comfort zone. And I think where we go wrong as a society is we've done too much to minimize pain and discomfort, and not enough to build joy, and not enough to allow for stoke or build those things. And so I think we've really minimized the opportunities people have to push themselves out of their comfort zone. And because of that, maybe we lack a lot of empathy, right? Because people push themselves when people are pushed out of their comfort zones, they can sink into an anonymous response versus really engaging with that emotion. And I think that's created a lot of the online animus that is now bleeding over into our ongoing national dialogue. I think I probably made several logic jumps there as I was trying to respond to that question.
No, it was good though. So let's find the line of best fit here. Let's connect the scatter plot. What would you say is the thread that connects, you know, the drive for adventure, and war and sobriety? Like what you're fighting either way, right? You're fighting in war. You're fighting up the mountain. You're fighting your addictions. Like what is the mental thread behind the drive towards these activities?
So I would push back on that a little bit and say, I don't know if you are fighting up a mountain. I think for too long we go too easily to a metaphor of war, and I think that's part of the challenge. We've got to find metaphors beyond war, and that's really hard, because so much, and if you look at mountaineering and the outdoors, our understanding of mountaineering really begins to be born, and outdoor adventure begins to be born kind of in the post-World War I mindset, right? So that's when you have, you know, even prior to that, you have John Muir, who's pushing for protection of Yosemite, and before that you have Yellowstone and our early park rangers, right, where the Buffalo Soldiers and African-American service members. And then you have Edmund Hillary attempt at Everest, and Mallory and that whole team, and they're all veterans, right? And so we lay siege to the mountains. And so I think figuring out how we move beyond those metaphors is really critical to how we engage in the outdoors more broadly. But I think that to connect that scatter plot, it's probably curiosity, and wonder. You know, what is it like if? What would it be like to? How do I get there? What's beyond that horizon? And that has been, I think, that driving force of just wanting to know more, wanting to experience more, want to meet more people. And that's been really interesting now that I have a 2-year-old, because I don't get to move quite as far down the horizon as I used to, right? 2 hours in the outdoors gets me a very different mileage number with a 2-year-old than it used to when I didn't have a kid. But I think it's really reiterated that curiosity piece, right? Because if you have kids or spent time with kids in the outdoors, you get to see things through their eyes for the first time. And like, you know, my daughter's totally cool playing with bugs in a 3 square foot patch of earth, and I'm just like, but there's a waterfall right up there. She doesn't care about the waterfall until we get there. She's motivated by what's happening in front of her right now, and as that bug moves, she wants to follow that bug. And so creating that curiosity and empathy, when you have kids, it's an opportunity to re-educate yourself as well. But I would say through all that scatter plot is that curiosity, that desire to experience and try something different and see something new. And I think that's credit to my parents.
That's something I've been struggling with for sure for years, is the constant focus on what's next. And I think a lot of people in our world and trying to always go see the next country, climb the next mountain, do the next thing. We're always drawn to new adventure, and it's hard to bring yourself back to what's now instead of what's next.
Totally. And I think that's, I refound the outdoors rather late in life compared to a lot of our peers, right? I started climbing again when I was 31. I'd snowboarded a little bit, but really didn't start skiing till I was 35. And that's when I started pushing myself out on slopes and everything else like that. And, one of my adventure buddies is like 27 or 28. And I catch myself thinking, I wish when I was that age, I was doing what you're doing. And I wish that I could be doing what you're doing now and had that time, because I don't have that time anymore. But I think we do that, and it discredits the lives that we've lived and the people that we've met and the communities that we've engaged with. And that's a constant reminder. I wouldn't give my 20s up. It was awesome. I had a blast. I made a lot of mistakes. I had a lot of trauma. But the guys that I played rugby with in my 20s are people I still keep in touch with and I'm still friends with and travel around the world for. And when one of our friends, the first guy from the rugby team died, right? And everybody showed up in Dublin, Ireland for his memorial service. And I hadn't been to war with most of those gentlemen, although a couple had served, and I had served with in the U.S. military. I didn't get sober with any of those gentlemen. I haven't climbed or skied with most of those gentlemen and their families, but there was that commitment, and I wouldn't give that up for anything. But I think you're right. It's one of the only sports, right? I went skiing in the Beartooth this year in Southwest Montana. Love the Beartooth. And we get out there, and it's immediately my thought is, the snow conditions aren't right for me to get on the objectives I wanted to get onto. Instead, I'm going to have to ski that couloir, and then the last day, I'm going to have to go glade hopping through amazing trees and amazing snow. And it's dude, you can take advantage of what is right in front of you. And then I got to go swimming with my little kid, and none of that is Instagram worthy, but that was the best part of the day. So figuring out how to engage in both parts of those things is, I think, really difficult, and we've made it more difficult with social media.
Yeah, Instagram worthy, right? Even saying that is, it's tough that's so prevalent in our minds. Comparison.
Well, yeah, but it's also if I want to get funding for a different expedition,
it's a necessity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the comparison thing is a double-edged sword though too, because it's obviously it doesn't make you feel great if you're seeing people do rad stuff and you're at your office and you're I wish I was out there doing it, or to your point, Stacy, I wish I had done that when I was that age or whatever, so that I could be at this point now. But it's also you need those people to look up to and to think about all those rad adventures that they're going on to also be motivated and inspired to do your own thing. But I guess it's when you're in that moment, you have to, I don't know, there's certain tactics to pull yourself back into the present instead of thinking about what shot is going to get the most likes. It's such a hard balance though.
Yeah, regarding the building blocks of building Stacy to where you are today, you, rather than looking back on what you could have done differently, you said you're happy with what you did, and rather than looking at you wish you did that in your 20s, where are you now as far as you have had this successful film, you've worked for some amazing companies, and this really impressive resume of impact and adventure, and you're talking about what's now and what's next for you.
Yeah, well, I appreciate all those kind things, because I think when you're living it, you're never that impressed, because there's always somebody else doing more, or and your peer group changes and evolves. And some of and I'm lucky enough that like a lot of the people I get to associate with are just doing amazing things in their life, regardless of the field, right? Like, I mean, every day I get to come home to a woman who, my partner and my wife and all this, who's an amazing mother. She's an amazing educator. She has such an amazing mind around engaging with students and first generation college students, and has such this justice mission in her mind, and the way she thinks is incredible. And I get to live with her, and I get to see her every day. And so I feel, but she's not in the outdoor industry for the most part, right? I mean, she's a very, she's reluctantly hardcore. That's how she describes herself. She's like, I'm married to you, so this is something that I have to do, I guess, from time to time. But so yeah, I mean, it's a grind. It's always a grind, and the grind just sometimes gets bigger, right? Like, somebody asked me today about like, well, how did you make that film? And I thought about all the other films that we'd made that like 12 people saw. And they helped build, because one of those 12 people was critical for the next thing. So what's next? I think figuring out how to really engage with stillness is really important, how to really engage with awe, thinking about how we do those things. I'm talking to a friend about a trip to Nepal, and rather than mountaineering, we're thinking about how do we bring people who would otherwise be motivated by mountaineering to engage in meditation and stillness. And I think that's, those are tough conversations to have, and there's not as cool a visual product necessarily that comes out of that. So thinking about how do we move storytelling beyond the two-dimensional. And I think storytelling is now an overused word like synergy, but it's an important word, and it's a catch-all. Ecosystem. What is the ecosystem of storytellers today? I studied urban design in graduate school, and I think it's still out there. It was a bullshit landscape generator. It's a hilarious thing, because like nobody can come up with more bullshit words than a landscape or urban designer. So landscape architect.
Check that out. Put it in the show notes.
Yeah.
Totally. Like if you're looking for like the center node of city activation is happening with ground floor retail.
Sounds good though when you say it like that.
It is, if you say it confidently, right?
Yeah.
So, Adventure Not War, we have Afghanistan, Bosnia, former Soviet state of Georgia. Those are big on the list. Those are the three big ones. And then I'm really interested in figuring out how to apply the same kind of framework to South Dakota, because that's where I grew up. And there was a tremendous near total genocide of the Sioux Nation that happened with Western settlement, predominantly Euro-Western settlement in the Dakotas. So I'm interested in that.
So what kind of challenges are you facing now, shifting projects and trying to get something new off the ground?
Yeah. Well, the other thing I should point out is all this is Adventure Not War is a side project, right? It's what I do. I mean, you were thankful enough to schedule me after 5 o'clock today, which is great. My 9 to 5 job is working for the Phoenix, and I'm the national director of programs there, and we're a sober multi-sport community. So we're helping to move ourselves and the addiction and recovery beyond stigma, and creating community and safe place so that people realize like when you quit drinking or using, you can still live this pretty tremendous and amazing life. And that means probably engaging in the outdoors or physical exercise to kind of define your own success and define your own level of amazing. So that's been really interesting, because for a long time, I think people have known me as the military guy, even though I haven't worked solely on veterans issues for several years. And then with a project like Adventure Not War with Ski Iraq, we've had success beyond what we thought we were going to have. I mean, Tribeca was never on my bucket list to get a film into Tribeca, and we got a film into Tribeca. Getting a film into Cairns was never, we got a film into Cairns, and that was never an expectation. We just wanted to create the best story we could to impact the people that were part of our community, And I think, and I've heard some musicians talk about that as well, right? And I wish I think it might have been the Bouncing Souls, but the guy was like, look, we just wanted to make music for our friends, and we continue to want to make music for our friends. And the fact that there's resonation beyond that is phenomenal. But you've got to really know, because I think if you're like, I'm going to make a movie and it's going to get into Tribeca. Well, what happens if it doesn't get into Tribeca?
Right.
Because chances are it won't. Like, we got really lucky. Somebody saw our film, they loved it, they wanted to move it through. So a lot of this is luck. And a lot of it
seems less authentic too. If you're going after the recognition, you can kind of see through that as pretty transparent in my mind.
Totally, and it's a tough thing to balance, because now that we've gotten in Tribeca, we're talking to lots of people about other funding, and we want to keep building, and we want to keep growing, and we want to, And so it's that like kind of constant, mix. And, I think it was one of the things that made Hayden Kennedy from the outside in so interesting, right? Because he didn't always take the big funds. He didn't really have a social media account. And yet he was one of the more, for as young as he was one of the most influential climbers of that generation. And that certainly influenced people up and down the spectrum. And Hayden's going to continue to have influence. Or Johnny Kopp, right? Who unfortunately passed before, and Micah Dash, before social media was huge.
We're breaking up here. You still there?
Sure. Should we just go to audio? That might be.
Let's try that.
Leave my video off just to save whatever bandwidth
well, it's
might
nice
be out there.
seeing you for a little while.
Yeah, nice seeing you as well.
So you were saying the people that had passed before Instagram is where we cut out.
Yeah, I mean, just thinking about authenticity, right? And what does that mean and how we do that? Well, at the same time, like, I think one of the things that happens, like you were talking about earlier with progression, is as you achieve goals, your other goals begin to change. Your dreams change, right? Like your dreams become, you kind of have that first dream that helps you move things, but after that, your dreams become an output of action. And I think if you stay focused on what it is you want to do and the impact you make in your immediate community, that can grow beyond that. And how we define success in a project or with inspiration and stuff like that, that just becomes really tricky when you begin to think about all those things and how you get there and what you want to do. And I just think we live in a world where it's harder and harder to help people define success on their own terms when everything is driven by ratings or feels like it's driven by ratings and likes and shares and that certainly is one way to have impact, but you never really know what, like this podcast, somebody might hear your podcast and decide they are going to change their lives based off of what the two of you are doing. But is that person ever going to reach out and say thank you? You hope so, but chances are no.
But you don't know, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So you just have to kind of work, and that's what I mean. I mean, I think that's why it's so important to really look to build out joy and help people build joy and help build bridges and opportunities for people to engage with joy and awe and to some extent stoke versus trying to minimize pain in the world. And I think part of the reason we're in this challenge as we are is because we just want things that are flashy and we want things to minimize pain. And the reality is that most things worth doing, most things that have real lasting impact, positive or negative, require a tremendous amount of pain and suffering to get there. And that sucks. But it's also pretty amazing at the same time.
Yeah, it's almost, I mean, I talk about this with my boyfriend all the time, is there's really ugly human moments and then there's really beautiful human moments. But I notice that we talk a lot about like the ugly human things that happen just in daily life that go on. And now that's a reminder, I think, to myself to talk about like the little beautiful things that happen on a daily basis, really daily.
Well, I think we innately focus more on the negative. Like when you have a cold, you feel like you're always sick. Yeah. But when you're like not sick, you're not walking down the street thinking, man, it's so good that I don't have a cold today.
Yeah, that's a weird metaphor, but I like it. You're all
Well, totally. But like another way to think about that too is like, so childbirth, right? Like I got to witness my wife give birth to my daughter, which is the most beautiful thing ever. If you were to describe it out of context, it's incredibly horrific.
Yeah.
What happens.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And so it's this moment of incredible beauty and joy and awe that is accompanied with, like it's kind of, it's not butterflies and soft serve ice cream.
It's not easy. No.
No. So, but yeah, it is. It's easy but at the same time, like you also don't want to overfocus to the point where you're like Pollyannish in it and are like, oh, there's nothing wrong with the world and my life is so great. Because at some level, I want to be able to use my privilege to help elevate other people. Like I want everybody to have the privilege that I have. Like, I want everybody else to be able to walk down the street mostly unmolested. I want people to be able to wake up in the morning and say, what am I going to do today? And that they have the opportunity to make a positive impact in their community in a way that, like, a lot of people don't. A lot of people are just struggling to survive. And I think, and are struggling for dignity, and are trying to find dignity, and are trying to find a way to feel dignified as human beings. And I think that's getting harder and harder to find for a lot of people. And so it's really easy to pass commentary and judgment, but it's like, you know, I've never had to, like, I've never woken up hungry because I didn't have enough to eat the night before.
Right.
So I get to go do this stuff. Like, I get to go say, my life is so great and enough things are taken care of in my life that I can go ski in Iraq. Like, that's a tremendous privilege.
For sure.
That's a tremendous, tremendous privilege.
So you touched on 3 words that probably, you know, everybody strives for, not everybody sees. But it was joy, awe, and stoke. What is the difference?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think they're all interrelated terms. I think able to fully separate all 3 of them, but I think stoke might be best described as whizzing down a ski hill, right? Or whizzing down a roller coaster. And it's just that, wee, yeah, like, amazing. You know, like, you can barely talk. Like, my buddy Ian and I got to go skiing in Japan, and we got done with a powder day. It was so awesome. We could barely speak to each other at the end of the day. Like, our minds were blown. We were just, hey, bro, oh my God. You know, and I was like thinking to myself, like, my wife can totally take care of our little one for the next 6 weeks, and there's enough money in my savings account for me to stay in Japan. And I just, oh my gosh, like, this was the most amazing thing ever. And I'm still, like, I can talk about it as I think about it, and I just flip myself right back into just how amazing that moment was in that whole week. So that's stoke. I think joy is kind of you're exhausted. Joy is that moment if you've had a really great Christmas and the little people in your lives had so much fun, and they tore open packages, and there's just that kind of sense of warmth and goodness, and people are all together. You're a little bit exhausted, and you're living back on the day, and there's plates that need cleaning and gifts that need, to be put away, and wrapping there, but it's just, what an experience, and snow is falling and there's a little fire. That's joy, kind of that warmth and goodness and feeling like, the world is okay. The world loves me. I'm safe in this little place or this bubble. To me, that's kind of joy, I think. And then awe is that unexpected, you round the corner and you just see something so beautiful, and it's just, or the first time you hear a song, or music or a movie that really moves you, and you're just also kind of blown, and you weren't necessarily expecting it, but it's just that, or like the other day, our little one wouldn't go to bed, and she was up kind of late, and the cat was out on the patio, and she ran out onto the patio. She ran out onto the deck to find the cat, and she looks up, and there's a sunset, and it's like 9:30 at night, and her mom and I are so tired. We just want the baby to go to bed so that we can spend 2 minutes staring at each other before we fall asleep. And she runs out, and she'd never seen colors like that before. She'd never seen the moon like that before, over the trees like that before. And she goes, "Oh, look at the light." And her mom and I, who are just chasing her around, wondering, like, why is there this naked, crazy person in our house? And we look up and we're like, we look at her looking at the light, and then we look at the light and we're like, the human experience.
Yes.
And that's that moment of awe. And then later, so for her, she's having a moment of stoke as she's like sprinting naked through the house, chasing the cat, right? Just giggling amazingly. And then that moment of awe is when she all of a sudden is stopped in her tracks by something she wasn't expecting at all, which in this case was a relatively banal sight, but that's that moment of awe. And then joy is that collapsed exhaustion between her mom and I as we go to bed, because we got to be a part of that. So that was a really long way to get to ultimately, I think, hopefully a succinct metaphor.
I loved every second of that. You painted a really great picture. It's it's like 90 degrees in July, and I can't wait for Christmas after the scene that you put together there.
Did I just have a hot chocolate with marshmallows in it? Because that's how it feels right now.
Yeah, right. But I mean, and you can put yourself into those thoughts when you have them, right? And I mean, that 90-degree July, maybe it's that, like, I don't know, like, you know, the jump into the lake or the river or whitewater rafting through some of the amazing wild rivers that you guys have up in New England, or jumping into the ocean, or feeling that sea spray that can bring you right back into that same moment.
Yeah,
Damn it, Stacy, you're so descriptive.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm gonna go to the beach this week, I think. Yeah, I'm gonna feel that spray on me.
It's great.
Yeah, but going back to the privilege conversation, because I did want to talk a little bit about that, and we were chatting before we started recording about it as well. The other day I was doing like 20 miles in the New Hampshire mountains with my friend, and we were just like having such a hard time getting up to the top of this one mountain, and we had slept in the car the night before, and there was just a moment that we sat down after we summited this one mountain that I thought, I literally chose to sleep in my car last night, to get up early and to like be out here with mud all over me and in the freezing rain. Not everyone can choose to do that, and I felt very like happy and privileged that I was able to do that. But it's hard sometimes to think that way when you're in the situation. You don't always reflect in that way. So, you know, how do you recommend other people using their privilege or being aware of their privilege for good?
Yeah, I mean, privilege is also really relative, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we oftentimes forget in these conversations with privilege, is that some people might look like me, might have all the same demographics that line up with me one-to-one, but because of the economic or spiritual or emotional or mental situation they're in, or the geographic situation they're in, may not feel any of that privilege, and may not feel like they can access any of the joy or any of the good things that I get to access, even though if they were placed in a different situation with somebody whose demographics were different, whether it be race, gender identity, sexual identity, they would definitely have privilege in those situations. And so you tally it all up, and one person might have more absolute privilege than the other, but that absolute privilege doesn't mean anything in their immediate context. And I think that is a challenge. But I think when people do feel like, if you're having a moment where things are going really great, like, stop and take an honest, when you're done with that, reflect and take an honest consideration of what it was that got you there. And there's nothing wrong with acknowledging privilege. But then you have to look at it and say, can I help extend this privilege to somebody else? Can I help remove a barrier for another individual so that they can feel this joy and they can feel this stoke or this awe? And what can I do to help make that happen? And it doesn't have to be everything all the time, but in your community, in your direct influence, what can you do to help somebody else with that, or help somebody be a little bit more empathetic? Or and then other people may not have had any privilege to get to that same mountaintop where you did, and they had to work and work for every single bit of that mountaintop experience, from the money to put the gas in the car, to find a pair of sturdy enough shoes to take the time to get up there. Might have been no act of privilege at all, other than the fact that they live in a country that is privileged enough where we have access in public lands. And so to continue to fight for that. And I think finding that balance and that engagement is really difficult, and ultimately has to be an individual decision. But I would really hope that when people have either fought through to get there, or they've had the privilege to get there, they recognize where they are, and they find something to help make somebody else's pathway to that a little bit easier. And that doesn't mean putting a escalator up the side of the mountain. It means ensuring that there's access. It means ensuring that that mountain continues to be a place where people can go. It means ensuring that maybe there are public transit options for people to get there. It means arguing for improved education policies so that kids have recess that allows for wild play. It means making it okay for multiple colors and gender identities to be in the outdoors and feel comfortable in the outdoors. But I think everybody can do something.
Regarding, speaking about where the chips might not stack up even, what is your take on your place in the adventure community and somebody else who might not be where you're at, or maybe you're looking at somebody who's a 20-something-year-old athlete getting sponsorship and you're vying for the same dollars from a company, or so is the 30-something-year-old woman crushing trails. What about this equality in outdoor sports?
Questions. I mean, I think the first thing is that each individual has to be motivated for the pure motivation of doing what they're going to do. And that goes back to what we were talking about earlier on social media. I've had the good fortune, and to climb with Alex Honnold and to be on an expedition with him for a couple of weeks and consider him a friend. One of the things about Alex is Alex would be doing what he was doing regardless of sponsorship. And the reason Alex Honnold is because he works hard every day to do that and to be that. And so, it's tough because I think I have a way to tell people to spend their marketing dollars and their resources to help me tell that story. But I feel pretty confident that one way or another, I'll find a way to make it happen. And I feel like, thankfully, there's enough values that are myself to continue to make that happen. And I think, and this is, I think that I have used and will continue to use my place in the outdoor to open doors for others and make those same connections. And I think we have to recognize that the pie isn't a static pie, but that we can grow it together, right? And that there's not just 10 pieces of whatever that goes around. There might be $10 that goes around this year, but we do to create space for others and to help others tell their story. And what does that look like? And it's always a balance. But I think being really honest with yourself and what you're trying to get done, and thinking about how what you're trying to get done can help it support the broader community. But there's always going to be that interplay. And I'm sure sometimes I've gone too far one way or the other in self-promotion, or maybe not promoting myself enough. Maybe there's some opportunities I've missed out there that I could have used or could have supported others. And so I just think you've got to be open to the experience and open to learning. And I look at who is on the North, like Lassi Sojitra is on the North Face team, and he's, Indian American and has one leg. We can't be upset that Boss, 5 years ago, that would have been unthinkable for the North Face roster. So there is some progress on that. I don't think I had any direct impact in that, but it is one of those things where I think when you see somebody else who's out there getting sponsorship and their story is being told, how do we make sure that how do we convince ourselves to be excited that story is being told versus being upset about it? And I think somebody who, I turned 40 in a couple months, I turn 40 next month.
Happy early birthday.
So, yeah. Thanks. So what I'm thinking about, right, is how do I clear space for the next generation to come through? And that doesn't mean that I don't get supported. That doesn't mean that I don't have a few more stories to tell or think that I deserve a few more marketing dollars and some deeper engagement with brands. I feel like I do. I feel like I have a story that's helping to create space for others. But that's the inherent challenge, I think, when you believe you have a story that should be told, is that you're asking for people to fund you, and that means they're probably not going to fund somebody else. But hopefully, if you're doing the right thing and using that, then you're turning around and saying, what other stories can we help tell? And what other introductions make? And again, thinking that, the pie is not static. We can all grow the pie together. But at some point that means that I'm going to be behind the scenes if I'm going to be in the scenes at all. And being okay with that, and being okay with the impact that you made at the time, and seeing where you're at and saying, all right, what impact can I make from where I am right now? But it is a challenge. And I think it's one, brands invested, thankfully, thousands of dollars for me to, and my team to go back and make a film about skiing in Iraq. And I hope they feel like they got their money's worth. And I hope brands feel compelled that I can continue to tell some compelling stories that need to be told. And my viewpoint is the best way to engage in that. But if they don't, then I'll find a way to get over there and tell those stories anyway to anybody who's willing to listen. But there is, I think, a certain arrogance in believing that I can tell, but that's just part of the human condition.
Yeah, no, I think that's an important lesson. It's for anybody striving to create something of themselves, personally or professionally. The most important thing at the start is authenticity in the attempt. Know what your why is from the start, and make sure it's the right reasons. So regarding your professional career, how much do you think that, like, you said that adventure not war and your life as an adventure athlete is apart from what you do with the Phoenix and with in the past with Sierra Club and AAC and Veterans Expeditions? Like, how has all that laddered up to your today's pursuits and who you are?
Yeah, I mean, it's separate in the sense that it's a side project, and I have different requirements for work that I have to achieve, and expectations set out. I have an employer, I have a boss, there's a board who answers to that boss and stuff like that. But I think it all kind of ladders up together. I think it all builds together for better and for worse, probably at times. And I think it's one of the things where people are like, how do you balance life? How do you balance adventure? I think the notion of trying to create a balance is, in the stricter sense of using a scale, is a false one, and I think leads us down and requires us to make harmful decisions about our life, right? Because you're like, well, work is over here and life is over here. Well, you spend a tremendous amount of life at work. And so I hope people are able to do work that they enjoy, or they recognize the sacrifice they're making for the work leads to something else that they enjoy or can feel proud of, or is building that joy. It's more of a blend, right? How do you blend your work and your life together to something that makes sense? It's more about, I guess, creating that stew. But there's a point where there's clearly too much cayenne pepper, right? So figuring out what that level of discomfort or spice might be, and then how you moderate that with the other things, and then figuring out who are the other people that you're inviting to your table, and what are you going to with your life, right? And how are you going to commit? So tonight, it's now 6:00. I've got to drive 20 minutes home after I talk with you, but it feels like, hey, it's a great opportunity to meet with some folks who are doing some cool things to maybe get the story out there. But I'm not going to stay after work every night to have these conversations, right? And figuring out what that blend is. And that changes from time to time, right? And I've been having this conversation a lot with my coach. I do have a coach, a physical fitness coach, and
Nice.
who helps me with my goals and my ideas. And I'm lucky enough that he works for a company that believes in me, and so I get to represent Mount Eddie and Sean Crotty's company, and then Coach Scott helps me. And we've talked a lot about understanding peak performance is going to look different year to year and even week to week. And Coach Scott is always talking about red light, do you have red light, yellow light, or green light week? And he's like, because if it's a red light week, we just need to figure out how you get doing a little bit. If it's a yellow light week, we'll go a little bit lighter. And if it's a green week, let's go all out. And figuring out what that looks like. And peak performance at 39 with a 2-year-old is very different than what peak performance at 37 with no kids looked like, and is going to look really different than, 44 with a, 6-year-old or 7-year-old is going to look like, and allowing for those differences and being okay with that.
Yeah, I love that. So for listeners, blend versus balance. So having that like traditional scale is not always going to be realistic for you, especially if you're your work is hopefully what you love as well. And then the other thing is the red light, green light, yellow light. I always say orange. I don't know why. Yellow light. Right. Yeah, I'm getting traffic signals messed up, so that's good. But so those three, and I think that's a great, yeah, great lesson for anything, right? It's like, how much time can I commit to this, or how hard can I go at this week? Because I think when you look at the greater like month or a year, or this year I want to do this, it's hard to be like, okay, but how am I going to actually get there? And I think those weekly increments will actually help you get there. So I think that's a great lesson for listeners.
Yeah, and it's one I fail on all the time, right? And I think...
so failure is part of it, another lesson.
Totally. Yeah. And I think, failure and pain, and I think going back to the whole privilege conversation too, like you said, like you're in a position where like you chose to feel the pain to go up the mountain. And there's a company out there called Suffer Better, which is run by a buddy of mine named Pete Downing. And he's like, look, we want to push ourselves 110%, but then we also have to push ourselves 110% in the community. And the goal is like, how do you choose to suffer better? And by the way, that is not an appropriate t-shirt to wear around a pregnant woman. So
good intel there.
But I think it's that conversation, I think, of like, really just being honest about what the sacrifices mean, and being honest about what that could or couldn't get you. And defining success in the sense of, I'm going to give it my all, and that there's going to be some intrinsic value in me giving it my all, even if I don't get X, Y, or Z. And in that pain, and when we feel pain, I think one of the other things, and this is a little bit of a jump, but letting other people feel that pain and acknowledging that their pain is real. And I don't think we do a good enough job in this country, or a good enough job sometimes in the outdoors even, of allowing other people to feel pain. And I think we need to do that, and that failure hurts, and letting people have a moment of grief for the failure or grief for the pain, and then helping them move on. Because I think we're too quick to dismiss pain and grief of other people.
A line in one of my favorite movies, Vanilla Sky, is that you can't know the sweet without the sour. So,
that's exactly right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's like what we talked about earlier, right? Some of the most beautiful moments in life, if you were to describe them, would sound absolutely horrific.
So true. I was thinking about some moments of my own that I'm going to reflect on later, but just awe and joy. And when you were describing those, I was just thinking about things in my life that I've been lucky enough to have awe and stoke and joy around, and I'm just feeling pretty lucky after this conversation, yeah, right? Stacy. And I hope other people can feel that way too.
Yeah, a lot for listeners to reflect on here.
Well, me too. But I think it's also like really important to think about how those emotions can be, from time to time, like think about how those emotions could be absolutely flipped on their head, right? And that is like, what if my daughter is running from somebody because she's instead of weeing, she's screaming because she's fearful of what's going to happen, and she runs out the door and she sees something on fire, and the world around her is burning, and rather than the exhaustion and the joy as we sleep at night, we're huddled tight, hoping and praying that we make it to the next morning, and that everybody makes it okay. And those exact same emotions in many ways, but in reverse, and the exact same actions of sprinting, without clothes into a night sky and seeing something that you'd never seen before, and then falling asleep exhausted, could be horrific. And we need to do a better job recognizing that, and then helping people to get into situations where those emotions are going to be positive. Because absolutely you can have it's called awful for a reason. It's full of awe, but in a very negative way. And I've seen and been awed and felt tiny in the most horrific way, like I couldn't do anything, and I've fallen asleep exhausted, fearful of what's going to happen the next day, and I've spent plenty of my time screaming. And so the very same things that we use to describe positive can also be used to describe negative. But I think we can't shy away from the negative, and we have to push through that so that we can get to the positive. Because if we're only trying to minimize the fearful running, we're never going to get to a point where we can maximize the joyful running into the sunset, right? And I think I think a lot of times we act thinking we're doing the right thing by minimizing that pain or that fear. And there's a time for that, obviously, but then we have to allow people and encourage people to move through into some of the discomfort and pain that might then lead to something better.
That was amazing. So, to sum up this episode, it's been just a wonderful journey of contrast, really, from tights at work to to running, from fire to sunsets, from fear to joy, from passion to purpose. Like, really, really fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today, Stacy.
Well, thank you guys. And you guys are in Boston, so I encourage anybody to get out. The gym is opening. We've got a climbing gym in Boston now for the Phoenix. And there's an instructor there, a guy named Lee Soares. You'll see him. He's bald with likely bright pink or purple or red sideburns, and incredible dude. And Lee, like me, is in recovery, and I'm going to quote him here, and I hope he's okay with that, but he once shared with me and a group of us that I'm thankful for the worst days in my life because they have brought me to the best days of my life. And I would hope that nobody ever has to go through what Lee has gone through to get to the joy that Lee has also found. But sometimes that's the reality, and I wouldn't trade it. I wouldn't trade those days for anything. I wish I could minimize some of the pain that I caused other people and the hurt that other people had to endure because of me. But I'm lucky enough that it's turned out all right, and I'll hope that tomorrow does as well.
We'll for sure look up the Phoenix here in Boston. And so where can people connect with you, with the Phoenix? What should they be looking up here?
Yeah, so the Phoenix, we're on Facebook as Phoenix National. The best way to catch up with me is through, people can look up thephoenix.org as well. I'm on there, as is Lee and a whole host of other folks and amazing people doing great things. But Rise, Recover, Live, at Rise, Recover, Live, or Instagram for the Phoenix, I'm at Stacy A. Bare, STACYABARE. And those are the best ways. People can also check out adventurenotwar.com. And Adventure Not War also has a Facebook page that people can follow us on.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Stacy. We really enjoyed our conversation, and we'll continue to try to spread awe, joy, and stoke.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for what you guys are doing, and good luck with the podcast. I'm so excited you guys had me on.
So there you have it. That's Stacy Bare. Incredible human, incredible stories. I'm sure you were as captivated as us. I think there were moments when either Emily or I were like totally zoning out, maybe. Just like just like listening to him as a passive person in this conversation.
Yeah, I kind of felt like I was listening to a podcast and not being interviewing
conducting
someone.
the interview.
Yeah, exactly. And I kind of was just like soaking it in. He's just incredible. He made me think differently about a lot of things, and definitely check out all of the links to what we talked about today for the Phoenix and how to follow him on social media and follow some of the stories in the show notes on exploreinspired.com/the Stokecast.
No, just /Stokecast.
Gosh, I keep getting this wrong.
It's just /Stokecast.
Okay, /Stokecast, guys.
exploreinspired.com/Stokecast. Where you can find everything from this episode and past episodes, and be sure to subscribe for future episodes. But regarding Stacy's work with the Phoenix, I do want to say one thing before we end this.
Yeah.
What is your experience with trying to cut alcohol out of your life? You're part of the outdoor industry.
Yeah. So I did that in January, and it was more because it was the holidays, and it was kind of like, they do that in Europe a lot. Like after the holidays, they'll just take a month off. And it was definitely like a decision I made. It was for me. And I actually went to the winter show at Outdoor Retailer, and there's just beer and alcohol like literally everywhere during the show. And not just during the show, but you end a hike, you go get a beer at the pub. You go climbing, you guys crack beers in the parking lot. Like whatever you're doing in the outdoor industry, it always seems to be combined with beer or alcohol. And so we've talked about this, and I think I've had multiple conversations with people our age where it's like, well, why are we doing that? Like, what is it that we're really benefiting from, like alcohol consumption after we do all these rad things that actually give us pure joy in the moment.
Right.
And it was very challenging. But I think after the first couple times that you're in like social situations in which it seems normal, or quotes, you can't see me quoting, but I'm quoting, then you develop this sort of like pattern of, okay, I don't need that. I can move through the world without it. But, not everyone is able to do that. Like if you obviously have an addiction, then that's a harder problem for you. And I think a lot of people struggle with that in our industry.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, that's something that people are starting to talk more about, which is refreshing. And actually, it's interesting. You were sober for OR Winter Market, and this past year, I went sober for Summer Market. I was doing a 60-day sober challenge of through the summer, which was difficult because there was the OR show, there was weddings, there was 4th of July, and
party.
Your birthday, and all these summer activities that it's so true are so intertwined with just drinking.
Yeah.
And for the first couple of weeks, it was a real challenge. But then kind of after that, I think they say it takes, 21 days or 3 weeks to like develop a habit or break a habit. And so after that, it became a lot easier. Just have soda water or kombucha or water or not feel like I needed something in my hand to be part of these social activities. Right. And, but not that we're up here on a soapbox talking about like everyone should stop drinking, like
beer,
for sure.
If people feel like they're healthy and they want to do it, like that's great. But if you feel like you're pressured to do it or you have to do it to be in those circumstances, then maybe start to have a conversation.
It is just something to explore personally and in your social circles. Is what is your relationship to alcohol and why? Mm-hmm. And for me, the reason for doing the 60-day challenge was, I just was like, all right, I know my baseline for training for what I can do on the trails and in the mountains when I do drink. Yeah. When I'm, have had some the night before or after the trail or whatever, but like, how much better could I be if I cut that out? And and not just alcohol, but like different parts of my diet. Yeah. I just kind of went through a 60-day, like, let me refine myself as a true athlete, training for the things I want to accomplish, and how much better could I be?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And the results are huge.
Yeah, it's incredible. And again, we're not on a soapbox. We understand that like people have different levels of addiction and relationships with alcohol, but it is something to consider and have conversations with the people that you love in your life. And I think that Stacy is a great role model in that arena. Obviously, he's like leading an organization in which they only focus on like sober living and sober lifestyle. So
totally.
Keep checking him out, keep following what he's doing, and keep, I guess, questioning the different parts of the industry and of your own relationship with different, parts of your lifestyle that you can improve. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm Emily Holland.
And I'm Jonathan Ronzio. We'll catch you next week with another episode of the Stokecast.